Hey there, pilots! This is Dauntless Sam, and today we'll be looking at the history of the Douglas SBD Dauntless and its flight characteristics in War Thunder. The Douglas SBD Dauntless was a World War II American naval scout plane and dive bomber that was manufactured by Douglas Aircraft from 1940 to 1944. The SBD, Scout Bomber Douglas, was the U.S. Navy's main carrier-borne scout plane and dive bomber from mid-1940 through mid-1944. The SBD was also flown by the United States Marine Corps, both from land air bases and aircraft carriers. The SBD is best remembered as the bomber that delivered the fatal blows to the Japanese carriers at the Battle of Midway in June 1942. During its combat service, the SBD was an excellent naval scout plane and arguably the world's best dive bomber. It possessed long-range, good handling characteristics, maneuverability, potent bomb load capacity, great diving characteristics, defensive armaments, and ruggedness. In most of these characteristics, the SBD was superior to the German Junkers Ju-87, the Japanese D-3A Val, and any dive bomber possessed by the Royal Air Force or the Soviet Air Force. A variant was purpose-built design for United States Army Air Forces, which used the SBD without an arrestor hook as the A-24 Banshee. Design work on the Northrop BT-1 began in 1935. In 1937, the Northrop Corporation was taken over by Douglas, and the active Northrop projects continued under Douglas Aircraft Corporation. The Northrop BT-2 was developed from the BT-1 by modifications ordered in November 1937, and provided the basis of the SBD, which first entered service in mid-1939. Ed Heinemann led a team of designers who considered a development with a 1,000 horsepower Wright Cyclone engine. 1 year earlier, both the United States Navy and Marine Corps had placed orders for the new dive bomber, designated the SBD-1 and the SBD-2. The latter had an increased fuel capacity and a different armament. The SBD-1 went to the Marine Corps in late 1940, and the SBD-2 to the Navy in early 1941. The distinctive perforated split flaps, or dive brakes, had been incorporated into the BT-1 to eliminate tail buffeting during diving maneuvers. The next version was the SBD-3, which began manufacture in early 1941. It had increased armor, self-sealing fuel tanks, and 4 machine guns. The SBD-4 provided a 12-volt electrical system, and a few were converted into SBD-4P reconnaissance aircraft. The next, and most produced version, the SBD-5, was produced mostly in the Douglas plant in Tulsa, Oklahoma. This version was equipped with a 1,200 horsepower engine and an increased ammunition supply. Over 2,400 of these were built. A few of them were shipped to the Royal Navy for evaluation. In addition to American service, the SBD saw combat against the Japanese Army and Navy with the No. 25 Squadron of the Royal New Zealand Air Force, but the RNZAF soon replaced them with the larger, faster, heavier, and land-based Vought F-4U Corsair. Some SBDs were also flown by the Free French Air Force against Nazi Germany and the Luftwaffe. SBDs were also sold to Mexico. The final version, the SBD-6, had more improvements, but its production ended during the summer of 1944. The United States Army Air Force had its own version of the SBD, called the A-24 Banshee. It lacked the tailhook used for carrier landings, and a pneumatic tire replaced the solid tail wheel. First assigned to the 27th Bombardment Group at Hunter Field, Georgia, A-24s flew in the Louisiana maneuvers of September 1941. There were 3 versions of the Banshee: the A-24, A-24A, and A-24B, flown by the Army to a very minor degree in the early stages of the war. The United States Army Air Force used 948 of the 5,937 Dauntlesses built. United States Navy and Marine Corps SBDs saw their first action at Pearl Harbor. A total of 18 SBDs from the aircraft carrier USS Enterprise arrived over Pearl Harbor during the Japanese attack, and Scouting Squadron 6 lost 6 aircrafts, while Bombing Squadron 6 lost 1. Most of the Marine Corps SBDs of the Marine Scout Bombing Squadron 232 were destroyed on the ground at Iwo Mooring Mast Field. On December 10, 1941, SBDs from the Enterprise sank the Japanese submarine I-70. In February and March of 1942, SBDs from the carriers USS Lexington, USS Yorktown, and USS Enterprise took part in various raids on Japanese installations in the Gilbert Islands, the Marshall Islands, New Guinea, Rabaul, Wake Island, and Marcus Island. Later SBDs painted to resemble Japanese aircraft appeared in the John Ford film December 7th. The first major use of the SBD in combat was at the Battle of the Coral Sea, where SBDs and TBD Devastators sank the Japanese light aircraft carrier Soho and damaged the Japanese fleet carrier Sokaku. SBDs were also used for anti-torpedo combat air patrols, and these scored several victories against Japanese aircraft trying to attack the Lexington and the Yorktown. Their relatively heavy gun armament, with 2 forward-firing 50 caliber Browning machine guns and either 1 or 2 rear flexible mount 30 caliber machine guns, was effective against the lightly built Japanese fighters, and many pilots and gunners took aggressive attitudes towards the fighters that attacked them. One pilot, Stanley Swede Vastasa, was attacked by 3 A6M20 fighters. He shot 2 of them down and cut the wing of the third in a head-on pass with his wingtip. The SBD's most important contribution to the American war effort came during the Battle of Midway in early June 1942. 4 squadrons of Navy SBD dive bombers attacked and sank or fatally damaged all 4 Japanese fleet carriers present, 3 of them in the span of just 6 minutes. They also caught the Midway Bombardment Group of 4 heavy cruisers, heavily damaging 2 of them. At the Battle of Midway, Marine Corps SBDs were not as effective. One squadron, flying from Midway Atoll, was not trained in the techniques of dive bombing with their new Dauntlesses, having just partially converted from the SB-2U Vindicator. Instead, its pilots resorted to the slower but easier glide bombing technique. This led to many SBDs being shot down, although one survivor from these attacks is now displayed in the National Naval Aviation Museum and is the last surviving aircraft to fly in battle. On the other hand, the carrier-borne squadrons were effective, especially when they were escorted by their Grumman F-4F Wildcat teammates. The success of the dive bombing was due to 2 important circumstances. First, and most important, the Japanese carriers were at their most vulnerable, readying bombers for battle, with full fuel hoses and armed ordnance strewn all across the hangar decks. Second, the valiant but doomed assault of the torpedo aircraft squadrons from the American carriers and from Midway Atoll had drawn the Japanese fighter cover away from the dive bombers, thereby allowing the SBDs to attack unhindered. SBDs played a major role in the Guadalcanal campaign, operating off both American carriers and from Henderson Field on Guadalcanal. SBDs attacked Japanese shipping throughout the campaign and proved lethal to Japanese shipping that failed to clear the slot by daylight. Losses inflicted included the carrier Ryujo, sunk near the Solomon Islands on August 24th. 3 other Japanese carriers were damaged during the 6-month campaign. SBDs sank a cruiser and 9 transports during the decisive naval battle of Guadalcanal. During the decisive period of the war in the Pacific, the SBD's strengths and weaknesses became evident. While the American strength was dive bombing, the Japanese stressed their Nakajima B-5N2 Kate torpedo bombers, which had caused the bulk of the damage during the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. In the Atlantic Ocean, the SBD saw action during Operation Torch, the Allied landings in North Africa in November 1942. The SBDs flew from the USS Ranger and 2 escort carriers. 11 months later, during Operation Leader, the SBDs saw their European debut when the aircraft from the Ranger attacked Nazi German shipping around Norway. By 1944, the U.S. Navy began replacing the SBD with the more powerful SB-2C Helldiver. During the Battle of the Philippine Sea, in June 1944, a long-range twilight strike was made against the retreating Japanese fleet, at or beyond the limit of the attacking airplane's combat radius. The force had about 20 minutes of daylight over their targets before attempting the long return in the dark. Of the 215 aircraft, only 115 made it back. 20 were lost to enemy action in the attack, while 80 more were lost when one by one they expended their fuel and had to ditch into the sea. In the attack, however, were 26 SBDs, all of which made it back to the carriers. The Battle of the Philippine Sea was the last major engagement where SBDs made up a significant part of the carrier-borne bomber force. Marine squadrons continued to fly SBDs until the end of the war, although the Curtiss Helldiver had a more powerful engine, a higher maximum speed, and could carry nearly 1,000 pounds more in bomb load. Many of the dive bomber pilots preferred the SBD, which was lighter and had better low-speed handling characteristics, critical for carrier landers. The Dauntless was one of the most important aircraft in the Pacific theater of World War II, sinking more enemy shipping in the war in the Pacific than any other Allied bomber. In addition, Barrett Tillman, in his book on the Dauntless, claims that it had a plus score against enemy aircraft, considered to be a rare event for a nominal bomber. A total of 5,936 SBDs were produced during the war. The last SBD rolled off the assembly lines at the Douglas aircraft plant in El Segundo, California on July 21, 1944. The Navy placed emphasis on the heavier, faster, and longer-ranged SB-2C. From Pearl Harbor through April 1944, SBDs had flown 1,189,473 operational hours, with 25% of all operational hours flown off aircraft carriers being in SBDs. Its battle record shows that in addition to 6 Japanese carriers, 14 enemy cruisers had been sunk, along with 6 destroyers, 15 transports or cargo ships, and scores of various lesser craft. The U.S. Army Air Forces sent 52 A-24 Banshees in crates to the Philippines in the fall of 1941 to equip the 27th Bombardment Group, whose personnel were sent separately. However, after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, these bombers were diverted to Australia, and the 27th Bombardment Group fought on the Bataan Peninsula as infantry. While in Australia, the aircraft were reassembled for flight to the Philippines, but their missing parts, including solenoids, trigger motors, and gun mounts, delayed their shipment. Plagued with mechanical problems, the A-24s were diverted to the 91st Bombardment Squadron and designated for assignments to the Java Island instead. Referring to themselves as Blue Rock Clay Pigeons, the 91st Bombardment Squadron attacked an enemy harbor and airbase in Bali and damaged or sank numerous ships around Java. After the Japanese downed 2 A-24s and damaged 3 so badly that they could no longer fly, the 91st received orders to evacuate Java in early March. The A-24s remaining in Australia were assigned to the 8th Bombardment Squadron of the 3rd Bombardment Group to defend New Guinea. On July 26, 1942, 7 A-24s attacked a convoy off Bun, but only 1 survived. The Japanese shot down 5 of them and damaged the 6th so badly that it could not make it back to the base. Regarded by many pilots as too slow, short-ranged, and poorly armed, the remaining A-24s were relegated to non-combat missions. In the U.S., The A-24s became training aircraft or towed targets for aerial gunnery training. The more powerful A-24B was used later against Japanese forces in the Gilbert Islands. A handful of A-24s survived in the inventory of the United States Army Air Force long enough to be taken over by the Air Force, when that service became independent of the Army in September 1947. The United States Air Force established a new designation system for its aircraft, eliminating the A for attack category through 1962. The twin-engined A versions were redesignated as bombers, with another Douglas aircraft design, the A-26 Invader, becoming the B-26 Invader. Most of the single-engined A aircraft were either classified as fighters or scrapped. As a result, the Banshee was called the F-24 Banshee, although this aircraft was scrapped in 1950. The first production Dauntless sent into action was the SBD-3, which was produced for the French Naval Aviation. A total of 174 Dauntlesses were ordered by the French Navy, but with the fall of France in the spring of 1940, that production batch was diverted to the United States Navy, which ordered 410 more. The Free French received about 80 SBD-5s and A-24Bs from the United States in 1944. They were used as trainers and close support aircraft. Squadron I-17 used a few A-24Bs for coastal patrol. The most combat experienced of the Banshee units was the GC I-18, which flew A-24Bs in support of Allied forces in southern France, and also experienced how deadly German flak was, losing several aircraft in 1944. This squadron flew from North Africa to recently liberated Toulouse to support Allied and French resistance troops. Later, the unit was assigned to support attacks on cities occupied by the Germans on the French Atlantic coast. In April 1945, each SBD-5 averaged 3 missions a day in the European theater. In 1946, the French Air Force based its A-24Bs in Morocco as trainers. French Navy Dauntlesses were based in Cognac at the end of 1944. The French Navy Dauntlesses were the last ones to see combat during the Indochina War. In late 1947, during one operation in the Indochina War, Flotilla 4F flew 200 missions and dropped 65 tons of bombs. By 1949, the French Navy removed the Dauntless from combat status, although the type was still flown as a trainer through 1953. The Royal New Zealand Air Force received 18 SBD-3s and 23 SBD-4s, and the RNZAF 25 Squadron did use them successfully in combat over the Pacific. Under the original plan, 4 squadrons of the RNZAF were going to be equipped with Dauntlesses, but only the 25th Squadron used them. The RNZAF soon replaced them with the F-4U Corsairs. In War Thunder, there is one variant of the SBD Dauntless, the SBD-3. It is a Rank 1, Battle Rating 2.0 naval dive bomber. It has a maximum speed of 420 km per hour, a turn time of 27 seconds, and a rate of climb of 6.8 meters per second. It is armed with 2 50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns with 1,200 rounds, and is defended with one rear turret fitted with 2 30 caliber Browning machine guns with 2,000 rounds. The bomb loadout for the Dauntless includes 2 100-pound bombs and one 1,000-pound bomb. As a dive bomber, the Dauntless is fitted with dive brakes, which can be extended to allow for stable dives. The plane is also equipped with a tailhook for aircraft carrier landings. Once out of bombs, the SBD's primary armament allows it for the strafing of ground targets, and is relatively effective for taking out air targets defensively. If ever tailed by an enemy aircraft, use your aircraft's good dive characteristics in order to outrun them. Also, the dive brakes are useful for causing aircraft to overshoot you, allowing for the use of your .50 caliber machine guns. I hope that this information has proved helpful. If you liked the video, please do like the video. If you would like to see more videos like this, feel free to subscribe to the channel, and if you think anyone else would be interested in this video, don't be afraid to share it. This is Dauntless Sam. Thanks for watching.